Simon Told Helen wins a half length. Zach Manelli second.
Welcome to Greyhound Gossip.
Peaky Blinders start cheering for Tommy Shelby wins the WA Sprint Championship final.
Featuring Peter O'Neill.
Mozza moves up to Mermaid Manelli. Fab's Gem 3 deep. Here comes Fab's Gem.
Hard Style Rico by 5 lengths to Simon Told Helen. Third Tommy Shelby.
This segment is dedicated to the discussion and promotion of greyhound racing.
Cindy's Oliver, Rockstar Patriot, Paul Stewart, back-to-back with Rockstar Patriot in the Galaxy.
Handsome Prince, a bolder clear. The former Tasmanian Handsome Prince has won the $1 million chase.
Racing. Bezecchi came out only fairly. Wise Barra shows early speed. Hunting through was Shy Emoji. Getting checked there was Bezecchi to the outside, and Miss Envy drives into second. 3 lengths away, Shy Emoji with Bezecchi, then followed by Curo. Well back, Sunset Comanche, Emerald Guard off the back, and Wise Barra hunting up on the inside. Miss Envy now sees the lure. Hunting on them was Bezecchi running on around the corner. Wise Barra, Bezecchi out wider up on the inside. Miss Envy. Miss Envy finds the front. Bezecchi coming late. Miss Envy. Miss Envy's won a nostril over Bezecchi, and ahead away in third place was Wise Barra. In behind them.
Very good morning, everyone. That was the West Chase final on Saturday night down at Mandurah, and a brilliant victory by Miss Envy. There was only a small margin of a head between the first and second. Bezecchi second, and Wise Barra was up close in third. But she's really very, very smart indeed, Miss Envy. She's yet to turn 2 years of age. She's now won 5 of 8 and takes her stake earnings to in excess of $57,000. She's WA bred, of course, winning the West Chase final, and she joins an elite group of greyhounds, including West on Booney, Hinto, Sarong in recent years, premium share back in 2019. So well done to Crystal and Steve Shinners. Friday night, the Holiday Coast Series final saw a very smart win by All Over Carja for Lewis Clay. Record another victory and got a very good strike rate, especially from box number 8, where he's now won 5 of 8. So that was the chasing over the weekend. We're about to be joined by Mark Botcher, great friend of TAB Radio, and he's been a long time participant in greyhound racing here in Western Australia, and he is about to join us. Before we get to Mark and say good morning to him, we're continuing on with our look at 50 years of greyhound racing, and one of the best of all times was Sandy's my mum. And going through the process of picking the top 8, so I learnt a lot about her sister as well, Sand Pebble.
Racing, Sand Pebble, Sandy's me mum got out fairly quickly. Sand Pebble, though, is going to hold Sandy's me mum at the winning post by a length. A length away, Satin Bow, Quit and Captivate. Behind them, Raheem Patrick, Track Talk, and last of all, Dreamy Bill. Into the back, Sand Pebble stole the march by 2 to Sandy's me mama. The sisters are nicely clear of Quit, and they've broken well clear of Captivate. Then Dreamy Bill. Well back, Track Talk, Raheem Patrick, and Satin Bow, but Sand Pebble says goodbye. She's left Sandy's me mum in a wake, and Sand Pebble's Gold Cup. She's got it all parcelled up, 50 from home. She's storming away. Revenge is sweet for Sand Pebble. She's thrashed them by 10 lengths. Sandy's me mum or Quit. So that
was 1990 and the Perth Cup, and Sand Pebble defeating Sandy's my mum. Of course, Sandy's mum into the WA and Australian Hall of Fame to talk about the history of greyhound racing. We say a very good morning to Mark Botcher. How are you, Mark?
Very well, Peter, and yourself?
Oh, I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for joining us. That'll bring back a few memories, and as I led into that in our conversations with yourself, Craig Evans, David Simonetti, David Short, when we were coming up with our top 8 sprinters and stayers, we learnt, or I certainly learnt, about how good Sand Pebble was, and of course we knew that she won the Perth Cup, but we know a lot about the history of Sandy's my mum. Tell us about how good these two were.
Yeah, in the end, Peter, probably a lot of people forget about Sand Pebble in some way, because obviously Sandy's me mum was, well, in the end she had the wood over Sand Pebble to some extent when they met, but obviously 2 extremely good quality greyhounds, and Sand Pebble was just probably in the shadow of Sandy's me mum in that the time that they were racing, of course, but obviously, if it was a different era, she could have been anything, but she still had an outstanding career when you think about it. 63 starts for 36 wins and 15 placings is certainly nothing to be sneezed at. Obviously, a Perth Cup winner, distance gift winner, WA Sprint champion in 1989, of course, when the series was run here in Perth, and then ran second in the national sprint final itself. Obviously, he beat Sandy's me mum to qualify for the nationals, but then Sandy's me mum turned the tables in the actual national final itself. So.
It's remarkable, isn't it? As you just mentioned, her career was outstanding, but she came up against a sister who went on, and we recognise her in the Hall of Fame here in WA and also the National Hall of Fame, and the only dual national sprint champion. So she was a star. When did you first get involved in greyhound racing yourself?
Probably just towards the end of the Sandy's My Mum era, really. I sort of started going on track from memory. It was around 1990, 1991, with a very young family I had at that stage, and that really was the start for me. I was really taken by it. My kids absolutely loved going to the greyhounds. We used to sneak out from the news agency. I used to own a little bit early on a Saturday night sometimes so we could get to Cannington in time, but that was really, when I sort of started going to the track, and it all grew from there for me, of course. I was going on course for a number of years, and then always had in the back of my mind that I'd love to be a bookmaker at some stage, and that was, once I sold my news agency, that gave me the perfect opportunity to look at doing something at the greyhounds, which sort of happened for me just before the mid-90s.
Yeah, before we talk about the greyhounds themselves, what about the bookmaking? You started off with bookmaking and then ventured off into many other aspects of greyhound racing. But how many bookmakers were actually fielding when you started?
When I started, Peter, there would have been about 3 or 4 from memory most of the time at that point. It gradually drifted away, of course, but I'm remembering that I was doing doubles early on. That was the thing that I wanted to get into. Obviously, I was the only licensed doubles bookmaker in greyhounds ever in WA, and it was something I was keen to do. It was something I just thoroughly enjoyed. It was a wonderful experience, really, but just gradually over the 3 years that I was a bookmaker, the numbers sort of dwindled away a little bit, and then unfortunately Bill Weir passing away towards the end of my tenure as a bookmaker, I sort of moved in to do some win and each way bookmaking because the numbers had really dropped away significantly by then.
When you got involved in the 90s, there were some stars, as we mentioned, Sandy's My Mum in the early. She won 2 WA Greyhound of the Years, Capobianco, Ladies of Star, New Peter. But there's some very good stayers as well during the 90s. Wits End, Jamali Park, and also Paradise Street, who never won a WA Greyhound of the Year, Paradise Street, even though he went on to win a national champion. But there were some very good sprinters in his era.
Yeah, it was quite a competitive time around the time that Paradise Street was around, of course. But certainly in that period, in the 80s and 90s, certainly a good number of stayers ended up being Greyhound of the Years and did run very, very well, both here in WA and some of them when they ventured interstate, and probably no better one than Paradise Street. When you talk about stayers going interstate, from memory he travelled more than a dozen times over east, and mainly because in that era, of course, it was a bit of a struggle to get races on here. The other one that I always remember, one of my favourite greyhounds, I think in the early 90s, was another real Dow sort of type, was Laddie's a Star, trained by the late Jerry O'Keefe as well. Sensational greyhound, Laddie's a Star. He had a pretty superb career record himself as well.
Sprinters, Reggie Might was in the late 90s. You would have enjoyed seeing Reggie Might not only win here in WA, but set some really quick records at both Mandurah and Cannington, but go across the east and be able to be successful as well in that first ever shootout.
That's right, yeah. It's a bit of a freak of a greyhound. I remember in that era I was sort of working obviously at the greyhounds and doing a little bit of work with Simo track-wise, and I remember going out one night between races with the late Dr. Peter Thomas, who was the vet at the time, and he used to talk about Regimite and what a freak the greyhound was in terms of its stride length, which was significantly, I'm thinking you're talking 10%, maybe even more, longer than a lot of other greyhounds. So it was a really unique greyhound, Regimite, beautiful looking dog, and just chased very, very well, and certainly very quick on both tracks as well.
We had, during the 90s, when you started, Victorian and New South Wales greyhounds that dominated the Perth Cup Carnival when they came across. Amy's Doll, Just Like Whiskey, Brisk Bill, Tentil Doll, Star Tribute, Rapid Journey in the 90s. And then in the early 2000s, Sammy Mint, Modern, Assassin El Grande, and the list goes on. It was a really prestigious race, the Perth Cup. It still is a prestigious race, but there was a big attraction from the East Coast for greyhounds to come across, and they dominated our WA chasers.
Certainly in that period in the 90s in particular, well, obviously probably right through into the 2000s they clearly did, but certainly in some of that period the Perth Cup was around 100-odd thousand to the winner, and there was certainly plenty of greyhounds that were prepared to travel, and it was quite a roll there in the 90s. It was quite brilliant, really, when you look back at Amy's Doll, Just Like Whiskey, and Brisk Bill. Tentil Doll was a wonderful greyhound, Star Tribute, and then, of course, the amazing greyhound Rapid Journey. They all won in a row from the early to the late 90s before we had a couple of local winners in Bliss Bale and then, of course, Nifty Fire for Keith Harding in 2000 being another locally bred greyhound that won the Perth Cup. And then, obviously, into the 2000s as well, there were a lot of interstaters came. I do remember sort of pushing the Perth Cup pretty hard and promoting it, probably to copped a little bit of criticism in some way in terms of the fact that the way we promoted, and I even travelled interstate in that time to promote the race around the tracks over east and on Sky as well. But in my opinion, it was always, if you're going to have a Group 1 race, you want to see the best greyhounds racing, no matter whether they're from interstate or locally. That's what group racing for me has always been about, and I'm sure it will continue in the future to be that way as well.
We've had some very good trainers that you would have seen, especially in the 90s, probably the end of, the Grant Langston era, and then you saw the Robertsons. Keith Harding was around, of course, and then the emergence of Linda Britton, who went on to dominate WA greyhound racing, and John Iwanick and Lexia Isaac and Dot Horton, those sort of trainers in that era.
That's right, Peter. Yeah, it was sort of coming to the end of the Grant Langston time, and then obviously Dot Horton had a little period there where she was dominating for a couple of years. The Robertsons obviously did very well, particularly more so probably at Mandurah at that time, and then of course Linda Britton and Chris House coming along. That was, talking of Linda, that was probably one of my one of the periods where I remember one of the Perth Cups that I attended was probably a unique experience, I think, on the Cannington, in the fact that the race even went ahead. I don't know whether you were there at the time, Peter, or watched it or heard about it, but that was the day in 1992 when Linda won her first Perth Cup with a greyhound called Winley Supreme, and it just rained
all day,
constantly, all day.
Yeah, and
there was still a huge crowd on course, quite surprisingly, and getting towards the race, it was clearly it was fearful. Everybody was fearful that the race would be called off, but it did go ahead with the lure trolley sort of managing to get through the water that was on the infield there at Cannington at the time, because that was still the time of the below ground lure, you might remember as well, that came out underneath the fence. So yeah, it was quite a unique win, that one for Winley Supreme. Probably it is clearly the slowest time a Perth Cup had ever been won in. Looking back at it, it was 32:15, which is a very, very slow time, of course, but the track was just a bog and there was just water everywhere.
Can you explain to our listeners who probably don't remember the change from grass to the loam, to the sand, and how that affected greyhound racing here in WA?
Yeah, I guess initially it was just before my time, Peter, that Cannington was a grass track like nearly every track in Australia in that era. Was from memory early 89 that the track was changed from grass to sand. In that time, of course, the infield was quite a bit lower than the raised area of the track itself, so the lure would go around on a rail on the infield and just the arm would come out underneath a fence, which was literally just, you would call it a very small cyclone fence, and that was a sand track, or people call it loam. We've always called it sand here, and that was a transition away from grass to sand. Then, of course, later on in the 2000s, we moved to an above-ground lure system. So you had the rail up above the ground and the lure coming off from that. And then even later on, I remember being involved when we moved to the transition turns at Cannington, where we did a little bit of work on the 4 turns on the track to transition the greyhounds into the corner to help with the injuries and help them get around those corners. But yeah, it was a big transition from grass to sand. I guess something that sort of had to happen. Obviously, maintaining grass is difficult. Probably wasn't as hard here as it was over east. You probably remember yourself seeing some of those grass tracks in that era with a big black sort of stretch around the running line all the way around the track, where the greyhounds literally took all the grass out. There was no grass for probably a metre and a half, and obviously very difficult to maintain a track like that, especially when it was wet.
Who was your... Sorry.
I think probably the biggest change, Peter, was the fact that probably the injuries changed to some extent. I'm probably not a full bottle on this, but I do remember in those grass track days there were a lot of toe injuries and nails and things like that obviously moving to sand or loam changed that. There obviously wasn't quite as many toe injuries as there was when they were caught up in the grass, etc., in the early times.
Yeah. Just before we let you go, and appreciate your time this morning, you saw and you were behind some of the form guides that we see today, and we're lucky enough to be able to have all this form to be able to look at and to invest on greyhound racing. But we saw some major changes, didn't we, in the systems computer systems that we've been able to use?
That's right, Peter. I'm probably lucky to have been involved in the 2 major changes. The first one was when we developed a system, myself and an IT guy at Cannington, just developed it fully in-house ourselves. He built it. I sort of designed a lot of the screens and did a lot of the testing, and we built that system. That system was called Iris in those early days. That was in the 90s, of course, and late into 2000. We built a race book, which was that was the time when we moved up to that big A4 race book for the first time. You might remember It used to be a little A5 book, but it went to A4 size and managed to get some reasonable form in that. I was pretty proud of that achievement. It's something we really did totally here in-house, and I always kicked myself for never copywriting that book because that was probably the start of people in the state starting to copy what we did. We were certainly at the forefront in that time. And then obviously later on I was heavily involved in the Auschase development, which ended up becoming the national greyhound system for every state bar Victoria in the last decade. And once I managed to score some funding, I managed to run a project to replicate and in fact even enhance the old race book that we had in Iris to the book that you see today, which is obviously chock full of statistics and very, very important in my eyes. I've always been heavily into statistics and sectional times and run home times and that sort of thing. I think that's the key for punting on greyhound racing, and we've been very lucky to be able to develop a book like that, and now it's produced, of course, out of Auschase itself.
Very lucky indeed. Mark, thanks for your time. I'll join you. I'll get you on again. We'll talk more about some of the other greyhounds that have raced and that we've discussed in regards to picking the top 8 sprinters and stayers, which we will announce later in the year. Thanks for joining us. Enjoy your week.
My pleasure, Peter. Thanks a lot.
Mark Botcher joining us, and he has been involved in greyhound racing for a long period of time. Let's go back. One of the greyhounds that Mark would have seen in his era, we talk about the dominance of the East Coast Raiders in 2020. A young girl went from a suburb named Coolbellup, and she won the Perth Cup.
Racing, Nifty 5 again okay on the inside. McAdams, Properosty with good pace. McAdams is going to go to the front. Nifty 5 gets a bump. Hahn bails across into a good position, but McAdams led. Properosty got underneath a Hahn bail. Nifty 5 will have to dig deepest, looking for an inside run. Next staying around, Bagheera well back under mine and Roxy Reasoner. Off the back, McAdams McAdams the leader. Properosty coming at it from Handbale and Nifty Fire. Properosty, McAdams fight it out. Properosty goes to lead but bumps with McAdams. Here's Nifty Fire. Nifty Fire's done it tough, but it's got up. Nifty Fire over Properosty and McAdams.
Yes, Nifty Fire back in 2020 was successful in the Perth Cup for a young lady by the name of Jodie Harding, who, of course, her father, late Keith Harding, was a leading trainer here in Western Australia. Speaking of leading trainers, Dave Robertson's about to join us. Him and his young wife many years ago would have gone along to Cannington and taken out feature races at the track. And I talk of Dave Robertson and Christine Robertson. And Dave joins us online this morning. How are you, Dave?
Morning, Pete. How are you?
Yeah, I'm going well. Gee, it was a good weekend for you and Christine on especially Saturday night, 4 winners.
Absolutely. It's great when everything goes to plan, but it's not, you're not always that lucky, but everything, all the tails lined up on Saturday night, and it was great.
I mentioned earlier on the feature race on the program, the West Chase was taken out by Miss Envy, whose mum, Miss America, has been an outstanding producer. Well, you not only had 4 winners, you and Christine on Saturday. Recall Kelso, the mum, she had 4 winners. Hasn't she been an outstanding breeding bitch for you?
Absolutely, yeah. She's been a great little producer, and just every time the pups go around, you just smile and think, gee, that was lucky.
What's the most amount of wins that you've had on one night?
I think we had 5 on one occasion a few years ago.
When you went to the track on Saturday, were you expecting to have 4 winners?
Well, it was hard to get a line. But most of those dogs who raced, apart from Hinto, are all youngsters. So we were just sort of, based on last week, it was a bit disappointed because they didn't really fire up. But last week they were in open company, so it was hard to get a line as to where we were at. This week, because we're in their own grade and company, most of them were able to lead at the first turn, and that makes a heck of a difference when you come to winning races.
Hinto now's won in excess of, I think, 320,000 or thereabouts, plus the WA Breeders' bonus. How would you compare that litter, so the litter of Hinto, compared to this new one that's coming through by Zach Manelli?
There's probably a very, very similar. They seem to take a little while to get going from that bitch. Hinto is doing probably his best work now that he did all his life, and he's 3.5 something. So there's a few others in the litter, but nothing. Hinto is the best by a fair way.
Yeah.
Then there was I had a blue bitch too, but she won over 80,000 in state money, so she was pretty handy as well.
I believe that Christine's going to be going across to Europe soon, so you'll be handling everything, will you?
Oh, I'd love everything. Probably the truth would be the hard part. No, she's worked hard and then deserves a break, so they're taking her and Linda are taking off for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, whatever it is.
Yeah, good luck to them. I mentioned the win of Nifty Fire back in 2020. You probably remember that, and you probably remember the early days when you and Christine first started having success, and you've been involved for nearly the whole time that greyhound racing has been around. 50 years. It's remarkable, isn't it, that we've been around for 50 years in WA?
Yeah, and it's great to see how, initially when we first started that the West Australians were the underdogs, and now you'll look at the line of dogs that go across the east, and the ones that come over here and try and beat us are all in a bit of trouble now.
They certainly are.
They have to send their best to get their winners compared to what they used to send in the early days.
Yeah, for sure. Will these dogs of yours go up to Northern for the WA Sprint Championship in a few weeks?
Yeah, probably will do, yeah. We're just going to give them a trial. I haven't trialled there, so I'll give them a trial and see how they go, then we'll go from there.
And you've represented Western Australia before. How important is it, and do you still think it has as much pizzazz, the Nationals, as it once did?
Well, it should do, because it's judged basically the same way as all the other races. You go to heats, then into a final, and then you go east to the selected track on the year. So it really should have the possess. Sometimes it doesn't seem to have. I don't know why. We don't seem to get the best date from each state for some reason. I'm not sure, but if we're getting the best 8 from each state and you're getting a winner out of those and sending them to the final, it should be as good as any cup.
Certainly. Well done. 4 winners on the weekend. Let's hope that the winning run continues.
So we'll do.
Good on you, Dave Robertson, joining us on Greyhound Gossip. Let's hope he has a good day and, well, why wouldn't you, after a big weekend. Let's go back to the 1997 South Australian National Sprint Championship when we had success for WA in 1997 at Angle Park with a greyhound by the name of Prince of Tigers, who'd won the WA Derby earlier. Straight after this, Tim Walker will be back with Off and Pacing.
Away, Prince of Tigers away fairly. Wineglass showing great speed. Wineglass getting across Prince of Tigers, then Oak Raider, Chicago Blue. Larrica McLaren into the fray from Malawi's mate. Kid Nelson and last Keto's Millie. A 2-dog war down the back. Queensland versus Western Australia. Wineglass about to be grabbed by Prince of Tigers. 3 to Chicago Blue closing in. Then Oak Raider and Larrica McLaren. On the bend, Prince of Tigers went for home. He dashed 2 in front. Chicago Blue going to second, but it's a Western Australian victory. Prince of Tigers wins. Second, Chicago Blue, and third, Larrica McLaren. They were followed in by Wineglass, Keto's Millie. Malawi's mate ran on strongly. Kid Nelson was a mile back behind those, and he's pulled up towards the tail with Keto's Millie.
What's gambling really costing you? For free and confidential support, visit gamblinghelpline.org.au.